Let me ask you one more question. I'm struck just in your presence. I was watching you on stage, watching the reactions from the crowd, looking you in the eye with your passion that you were displaying and talking about so many issues. And yet you hear candidates suggesting that a vote for President Biden because of his age is somehow a vote for you. And that is hurled as an insult. It's intended to demonstrate some negative viewpoint towards you. What is your reaction to this thought that with your background in particular, with your career, that there is some thought that you are incapable?
Well, I think that most women who have risen in their profession, who are leaders in their profession, have had similar experiences. I was the first woman to be elected district attorney. I was the first woman to be elected attorney general of the state of California. And I'm the first woman to be vice president. And I love my job.
Several months later.
Black folks, every time I turn around, I just get more and more sick of y'all. What in the hell are y'all celebrating? Y'all haven't seen Kamala this entire time. Kamala did the same exact thing the average do when they know they're about to need you. Figure out a way to get in contact with you. She threw up a barbecue. Been getting tricked for years with food.
And so this is a message for you educated liberals and progressives who somehow missed what's obvious about the economy. We can't afford to be progressive anymore. Like, we printed money, right? We opened borders, flooded the census, which indirectly impacted the cost of living to rise. That's why you can't afford anything. We could not afford to fund Ukraine for your democracy. We could not afford to fund Iran either, but we are. We're spurring World War III. We can't afford to do that, but we are. So here's my point. If you want to focus and fixate on Kamala Harris's genitals and her brown skin, I hope you understand political strategy is making a fool out of you. She showed you. Look at her resume on the border. She showed you that her Marxist subscriptions make her incompetent. They disqualify her from being the leader of the country.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about the mainstream liberal media psyop, the AstroTurf campaign to make Kamala Harris a thing, okay? Even though we know for certain that the Democrat Party and just the American people in general do not want Kamala Harris. We know this because she lost the Democrat primary without a single vote being cast because she dropped out before the first primary because she was just that bad, okay? She was terrible, okay? And she came into that Democrat primary hot, okay? She was one of the favorites, okay? However, after the American people, the Democrat Party got exposed to Kamala Harris on a debate stage. After the first debate, it was downhill from there, okay? And I believe, personally, that's what's going to happen to Kamala Harris and her AstroTurf presidential campaign that the mainstream liberal media is trying really, really, really hard to make a thing, okay?
All right, what you were just watching there was the first campaign ad of Kamala Harris's 2024 presidential bid, featuring the song Freedom by none other than Beyonce. Queen Bee herself reportedly gave Harris the green light to use her hit song as an anthem for her campaign. This is a big deal. A BFD, as some might say, because Beyonce doesn't just give clearance to her music to anybody. In fact, she's known for having very strict guidelines around permissions to use her music. The superstar has not yet formally endorsed Harris for president, but it seems the beehive is sweet on the K-hive. All right, you're going to hear a lot of buzzwords like K-hive in this stretch of the 2024 campaign, especially if you find yourself in the company of the young people. You're going to see this vibrant chartreuse color everywhere. You'd probably be asked if you fell out of a coconut tree. Brat summer? Yeah, you're in the heat of it. If all of this sounds familiar to you, then congratulations. You are chronically online. If it doesn't sound familiar to you, don't worry. I am here to try to do my best to explain it all to you. We'll start easy. with the K-Hive. The K-Hive is essentially Kamala Harris's longtime unofficial fandom. It's the play on the Beehive, which is Beyonce's devoted fan base.
Part of the PSYOP is this idea that Kamala Harris is gaining momentum and she's gaining in the polls. I'm pretty sure you guys have heard that all week, okay? Kamala Harris is catching up to Trump. She's closing the gap, okay? She's so great.
Today's meeting comes as her campaign is getting a boost from a new poll by the New York Times. And what this showed was Harris narrowing the gap against Trump. Now, Trump got a post-convention bounce, but when you look at it all in aggregate, Harris is now 4 points ahead of where Biden was polling in the same poll before he dropped out, which puts the race in a statistical dead heat, 48-47. Now, we'll see. Does she just continue to surge up or not? Obviously, you haven't had the convention bounce from the Democrats yet. The poll does show Harris making strides with groups that Biden had been struggling with, which includes perhaps most notably young voters. 56% of those between the ages of 18 and 29 back Harris, which is 16 percentage points more than Biden. That's a pretty stunning number. Independents, 45. Biden had 37 there, so doing significantly better there as well. And with Latinos, 57% back her, it was 41% for Biden. So that is obviously dramatic. In electoral politics in the United States, it doesn't get more dramatic than that. In fact, it's unprecedented for anything to move like that. So that's the reality of the situation. The question is it for now or forever? But you do see that energy in the Harris campaign events that we've seen so far, too, what they've been getting in terms of the boost from the polls. Today, Harris speaking to an energized group of voters from the American Federation of Teachers.
While you teach students about democracy and representative government, extremists attack the sacred freedom to vote. Just think about it. So we want to ban assault weapons, and they want to ban books.
Yeah, so again, I find it hilarious that the cool candidate for the Democrat Party, Kamala Harris, is talking about how Republicans are trying to ban the right to vote, which, by the way, I think the mainstream liberal media should do a fact check on that, because I don't know of any legislation that Republicans are putting forward that actually bans people's rights to vote. And if this is the line of attack Kamala Harris is going to use, then Republicans have an easy rebuttal, right? All they got to say is that you cannot be talking about trying to save voting rights when nobody voted for you, right? All you got to do is just ask, well, Kamala, who voted for you, right? Who voted for you to be the Democrat Party nominee? Nobody voted for you. So again, you're the last person that should be talking about saving voting rights, okay? Because listen, at the end of the day, the mainstream liberal media may believe that the American people are stupid, and undoubtedly a certain portion, at least a third, are as stupid as the mainstream liberal media believes that they are. But in my opinion, I have faith in the American people that they can see the obvious. They can recognize the obvious, which is that Kamala Harris is extremely corrupt. That, or she lacks good judgment, because there's a bombshell poll that came out. I'm about to pour some cold water on this Kamala Harris momentum, right? I'm about to give them a reality check here that shows 92% believe Kamala Harris involved in Biden health cover-up. Again, this is a crazy number to think about. 92% of Americans believe that Kamala Harris was involved in some way in helping to run cover for President Joe Biden's declining health, which is a big deal because it speaks directly to her judgment or her corruption, okay? Because it can either be she lacks the judgment to recognize that Joe Biden was mentally declining, which again would speak to her judgment. She does not have the judgment to be president of the United States, or she knew and she covered it up, which would speak to her corruption. Both are pretty bad when 92% of Americans believe that, hey, you were behind the effort to conceal the decline of the president's health, okay? And when you look at the poll more in depth, the numbers kind of get worse, okay? Because 68% believe that Kamala Harris was involved a great deal, only behind the Biden family themselves and the White House. Again, the closest people to Joe Biden, right? And Kamala Harris here, almost 70% of respondents believe that, hey, she was involved, okay? And again, this is something that the mainstream liberal media should be asking Kamala Harris, but no, they're not. Instead of asking her tough questions like this, they are campaigning on behalf of Kamala Harris, pretending that she has some organic support and that young voters are going to come out in mass and vote for her and she's so amazing, when that's just certainly not the case if you look at the numbers compared to where Joe Biden was in 2020.
So I want to take a look at Trump versus Democratic margin. Just remind folks where we were at the end of the 2020 campaign. Joe Biden won voters under the age of 35 by 21 points. What do we see with Kamala Harris? Well, she's still ahead, but the margin here is significantly less than what we saw with Joe Biden back in 2020. She's up by just 9 points. You may make the argument that was better than Biden was doing before he got out. But compared to that Democratic baseline, where Democrats have historically in presidential elections, at least this century, been carrying that young vote by 20 or more percentage points, she is way down from that. So if this is unique support among young voters, I would like to know what non-unique support is. Is it even worse than this?
Is she doing better than Biden was, though?
She was doing slightly better. Maybe Biden was up by, like 6 on average or 5. This is maybe slightly better, but this is not game-changing stuff, Mr. Berman.
All right, what have we seen in terms of motivation?
Yeah, so, the other thing is we talk about vote choice, right? But let's also talk about motivation, right? Because it's not just who you would support, it's whether or not you come out to the polls. And this, I think, is rather interesting. Do Democrats say they're more motivated to turn out after Biden left the race? Well, we do see a significant portion of Democrats who say yes, 39%. The thing I was interested in was it disproportionately younger voters who said that they were more likely to turn out or more motivated to turn out. And what we see here is it's 42%. Not a big difference between 42 and 39%. So this idea, again, that the vice president has unique potential to dig in and get young voters to turn out, John, it's just not there in the numbers despite all the internet memes that are going around.
At least not yet. And one of the issues has been, Harry, this trend, which I think you were among the first to point out. Young voters have changed or say they are changing in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, oftentimes it's difficult to go against the grain. Kamala Harris may be fighting uphill. So I want to look at party identification again. Voters under the age of 35. Go back to 2020. This is the Pew Research study. This is one of the best studies that we have. And look at that. 56% of young voters said that, in fact, they were Democrats. They identified as Democrat or lean Democratic. You look down at 2024, it's 49%. Look at the Republican jump from 39 to 49%. So when we say that Harris is doing worse than Biden, it's not that she's uniquely bad. It's rather she's fighting uphill. She's trying to fight against a wave that is going against the Democrats among young voters. And Harris may be unique in some ways. Maybe she does slightly better than the generic Democrat, but not all that much better.
With this
thing to keep in mind, I think there's all this talk of all this Harris momentum. Maybe there's a slight bit of momentum, but I would argue it's actually a little bit smaller than folks think. So pre-Biden dropping out, look, Trump was up by 2 over Harris. We look at the polls now this week. What do we see? We see Trump is up by 1 over Harris. The massive change is actually the change of candidates, because prior to Biden dropping out, he trailed by 6 points in these exact same polls that we look at here, where Harris was only trailing by 2 points. So the movement is actually from Biden to Harris, not actually Harris herself necessarily moving.
Yeah, so what you're actually saying when you look at the numbers is, one, Kamala is still performing worse than Joe Biden did in 2020. And that would have to be the baseline for her to have a chance to beat Trump, right? However, among black voters, Latino voters, and young voters, she's not performing as well as Biden was in 2020, right? If she can't beat Biden and his numbers in 2020 with those demographics, she's not going to win, right? It's just not going to happen. And again, what you're seeing here is not Kamala Harris all of a sudden getting this great momentum versus where she was at before Joe Biden dropped out. No, what you're saying is that you have Democrats that said, hey, you know what? I can't vote for Joe Biden. Essentially saying, okay, well, I will vote for Kamala Harris, but they're not necessarily new Kamala Harris voters. These aren't people that are all of a sudden inspired to vote for Kamala Harris. And again, we know what happens when people actually get exposed to Kamala Harris. Her numbers don't go up, they go down. And this is why MSNBC is getting a reality check from Democrat strategists like James Carville, who, I don't think the guy gives the greatest advice in the world, right? But he's been around for a long time, and even he is saying, yeah, you guys might want to slow down on this Kamala Harris momentum train, because it seems as if we're in the honeymoon period right now, and this could be the best that she performs, because once the Republicans actually start to really attack Kamala and to hone in on these attacks, this could be the best that we see Kamala perform.
The water was choppy. Now it seems in all measurable ways, from buzz to the polling we just mentioned, and I'll show more about in a minute, to fundraising, to have a lot of smoother sailing. Your thoughts first, big picture.
Well, I hate to do this, but I got to be the curmudgeon. I have to be the skunk at the garden party. this is too triumphalist, okay? This is everybody's giddy. I look at the coverage and it's great, and if I had to write a play about what I think it's going to be like, it would be entitled The Ice Pick Cometh, okay? Get ready, they're coming, all right? And it's good, everybody should feel good and liberated and everything else. But if we don't win the election, we hadn't done anything. We haven't changed the temperature in America, we haven't changed anything. And I think the vice president, I hope that, her campaign is getting ready. I hope they're listening to my friend and fellow New Orleanian, Don Brazil, who actually, I think, has the same kind of view of politics that I do. And they're coming at us, and they're going to keep coming. And this kind of giddy elation is not going to be very helpful much longer, because that's not what we're going to be faced with. And I think the vice president, put it in athletic terms, needs a really good cut man in a corner, because she's getting ready to get cut.
Let me show you the polling. No, hey, we welcome all views, all points, and I know you're a practitioner of the game, so you know when the game has 15 weeks, 100 days left, and what you're up against. You don't want too much celebrating to extend your sports analogies. You don't want to celebrate before you're in the end zone. I think people get that, even if they are feeling very different than they did last week. Very early. Francesca is absolutely. Go ahead, and then I'll show you the polls. Go ahead.
No. I was finished. Go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, well, Francesca's right. It's very early to judge any polling because it's all new information. It's all going to take a while to shake out. But to the extent that we learn anything from these state polls, she's already doing better than Biden was if they're both somewhat known quantities. Trump's margin here pretty tight in states like Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Pretty much tied in Wisconsin. Harris improving on Biden, standing by a nudge there. Depends on the state. And again, I want to tell viewers, as I always do, these are within the margin of error. That means that if you're plus or minus 1 or 2 there, it's plus or minus 3.4 in the margin. So it's statistically speaking tied.
Yeah. So James Carville is basically giving the exact same warning that I'm giving, which is that, hey, a lot of this hype around Kamala Harris is fake, right? It's very fake. Again, as you guys saw in the CNN poll, she's only gained 1 point. 1 point after a whole week of the media coordinating her as the next coming, okay? And she hasn't really been attacked like that. She hasn't been put under the microscope yet, and she's only gained 1 point. That's pretty bad, right? That's actually really, really, really bad, okay? But again, this is classic participation trophy celebration, because Kamala getting in the race, she got a bump just from getting in the race, and the bump was minuscule, right? But yet the mainstream liberal media is celebrating this as if, again, she's the next coming, okay, of Obama. And that's just certainly not the case, in my opinion. And when you look at the swing state polls, on average, what you're seeing here is that if the election were held today, Trump will win in a landslide in what really matters, which is the Electoral College. I mean, you have Trump only behind by 2.6 in Virginia, up 0.6 in Wisconsin, up 2 points in Michigan, up 2.6 points in Pennsylvania, up 4.8 points in Georgia, up 6.4 points in Arizona, and up 8.6 points in Nevada. Again, this is an average of polls over time, but let's take a look at one of these polls that were conducted recently, okay, after Kamala Harris became the nominee.
Now to a News Nation exclusive this morning. New polling shows the Democrats getting a significant bump from the change at the top of their ticket.
Again, what is the actual bump? Okay, is it a bump for Kamala Harris in her prior polling, or is it just a bump for Biden to Kamala, right? That is the question here. Again, you have to understand how these people are framing this, because what they're trying to do is that they're trying to manufacture momentum for Kamala Harris. That's what they're trying to do, okay? Again, it's not about being cocky and saying that Trump is going to win no matter what. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you can't let them drive the narrative that Kamala is doing so great, because if people believe that she's doing so great, then they're more likely to be excited about voting for her if they believe that she can actually win. What happened to Biden was that essentially nobody believed that he can win anymore, and that started to show up in the polls. He was free falling because everybody knew at that point, okay, he can't win. So we cannot give Democrats an advantage based off a false narrative.
According to the latest survey from The Hill and Emerson College polling, Vice President Harris has significantly cut into President Trump's lead in several key swing states. They include Wisconsin, where she and President Trump are currently tied in a hypothetical head-to-head. Nick's here to help us break it down. So what are these numbers saying, Nick?
Hannah, these numbers are saying that momentum is definitely on the side of Democrats right now. Our new data from partners at Emerson College Polling and TheHill.com showing Vice President Harris making significant cuts into the lead that Mr. Trump has held over Mr. Biden in several key swing states in just 1 week's time, beginning with Arizona. Vice President Harris now at 44%, Mr. Trump at 49%. We're talking about a difference of 5%. In Pennsylvania, Vice President Harris at 46%, Mr. Trump at 48%.
Okay, so look at these numbers, right? So look at these numbers. This is how bad Biden was doing, right? Biden was doing so bad that Kamala Harris losing by 5 points in a state that Biden won in 2020 is somehow Democrats gaining momentum. No, what actually is happening, guys, they switched Kamala in. She got a very, very, very slight boost from the switch in, but she did not improve very much over her prior performances versus Trump, right? Which indicates that Kamala Harris is kind of a known commodity already for people who actually support her, right? And again, that's what you're seeing. So again, listen to the framing, but if you look at the numbers, it's like, no, she's still doing pretty bad, right? If the election were held today, she would most certainly lose in a landslide.
A difference of only 2%. Its story continues when we go to Michigan. You know, we've had eyes on Gretchen Whitmer and everything happening in Michigan. Vice President Harris at 45%, Mr. Trump at 46%. And in Wisconsin, take a look at these numbers, Hannah. 47%, the two are tied. Vice President Harris has caught up with Mr. Trump with polling in a swing state like Wisconsin. And why does that matter? Because when you compare that to how President Biden was polling against Mr. Trump just a week ago, the gains are clear. Look at Arizona. Arizona, 4% gain for Ms. Harris. Mr. Biden was at 40%. Vice President Harris, she's at 44%. The story continues in Wisconsin. Once again, Mr. Biden was at 43%. Ms. Harris is at 47%, a 4% gain. Michigan, the story continues, a 3% gain. In Pennsylvania, another 3% gain. Hannah, all of this matters because all of these polls are about 3% within the margin of error. That means that there's a lot of ground to gain for both candidates, particularly for the Democrats as they head into the DNC next month.
Yeah, so what I think it actually means is that there's a lot of ground to be lost, right? Because I really do believe that this is the honeymoon period for Kamala Harris, where she's going to be polling the best that she's going to poll at this period of time. And then once the American people actually really start to learn about who she is, I think that her poll numbers are going to fall, right? That's what I believe is going to happen. I will give it up until the week after the DNC, right? I think that she may carry some momentum and she may end up flipping some states, right? She may start to flip some states, but I don't think she's going to get back to Biden's 2020 poll numbers, right? I don't think she's ever going to perform that well. And if she can't get back to that as a baseline, she is in big, big, big trouble, okay? And don't let the mainstream liberal media fool you. They're comparing Kamala to Biden, but Biden was doing so bad that literally anybody could have been switched in and they would have got the same boost that Kamala got. The fact that Kamala's boost isn't more than what it is now, honestly, in my opinion, is an indication of bad news for Kamala. This is actually the best case scenario for the Trump campaign because, again, you would think that if people actually agree with the Biden administration and their policies, right, that Kamala will be performing a whole lot better. But the fact is that Kamala is still losing to Trump right now in the election, decidedly losing, okay? And again, she's getting nothing but sweetheart treatment from the media for the past week. I think that this polling is good news for Trump thus far because, again, it could have been worse, right? She could have been outright beating Trump, but that's not the case. She's not even close to Biden's numbers in 2020. And if she doesn't ever hit those numbers, then, again, there's some concern here because Trump tends to underperform in the polls and Democrats tend to overperform in polls. And if that holds true going into this election, if these numbers continue to hold, if this is her ceiling, then yeah, it's looking really good for Trump right now. So, hey, let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.